Clara Monroe rode into Calico Ford with the setting sun at her back and the grit of the Arizona Territory coating her teeth. The day had died hard, bleeding purple and orange into the high, broken mesas that walled in the valley. The wind never stopped. It was a living thing, a restless hunter that chased thin, spiraling ghosts of grit and alkali across the flats. Dust devils, she thought. A fitting welcome. She was tired down to the bone. The last leg of the journey from Tucson had been 40 miles of sun-baked rock and needle-thorned mesquite, a landscape that felt less like a place and more like a judgment. Her gray traveling suit, once so respectable, was stiff with dust and sweat. Her mare, Bess, stumbled, her head hanging low. Calico Ford was not a town that rose to greet you. It was a raw settlement, a collection of unpainted pine buildings and sagging adobe huts huddled along the banks of a river that looked less like water and more like a strip of dull, hammered metal in the twilight. High on a bluff overlooking the main street, a massive billboard was stark against the bruised sky. San Pedro Consolidated Mine, S. Creed, Proprietor. Below it, in smaller letters, "We built this town." The air was thick, heavy with the smell of alkali and the promise of violence. The sky itself was gathering a sickly yellow-green in the east, the sure sign of a coming monsoon. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. This was it. This was the place May's letters had come from. First, they had been bright, full of talk of good wages and dry air. Then, they had become clipped, sparse. And then, 6 weeks ago, they had stopped. She nudged Bess toward the largest building with a faded sign, "Livery Feed." The mares shied as they passed the saloon, where a piano was already hammering out a tinny, desperate tune. The livery smelled of stale hay, ammonia, horse sweat, and the bitter char of the forge. A hollow-chested boy of maybe 16, mucking out a stall, barely glanced at her. "I need my mare boarded," Clara said, her voice hoarse from the dust. "Water, feed, and a good rubbing down. She's come a long way." The boy spat a stream of tobacco. "That'll be 4 bits, in advance." As Clara fumbled in her reticule, Bess suddenly sidestepped, her ears pinning back as she snorted at the deep shadows of the stable. "Easy, girl," Clara murmured, but her own nerves were just as frayed. A shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom. He did not seem to walk out. He simply was. A man so large, he seemed to block the last of the light from the doorway. He was massive, taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders as broad as an axe handle. He was Apache. His black hair was long, held back from his face by a simple strip of cloth. He moved with a silence that was unnatural for a man of his size. He did not look at Clara. He looked at the horse. He spoke 2 words, low and guttural, in a language that sounded like stones rolling in a deep creek. Bess stopped fidgeting instantly. Her head, which had been tossing wildly, lowered. Her ears, pinned in alarm, flicked forward. The man reached out one hand, a large, scarred hand, and ran it down the mare's neck. Bess let out a long, shuddering sigh and leaned into his touch. Clara let go of the reins, her own legs stiff as she dismounted. "Thank you." The man turned his gaze on her. His eyes were dark, unreadable in the twilight. A scar, old and white, cut a path from his jaw to his cheekbone, pulling one side of his mouth into a permanent, grim line. His hands, she saw, were not just nicked. They were maps of hard labor, cross-hatched with old rope burns and silvered scars. He took the reins from her. "She needs water and feed," Clara repeated, trying to sound firm. "I know," he said. The voice was as deep as his stillness. He led Bess into the dark, and Clara was left standing alone, feeling utterly out of place. A fragile piece of china set down in a blacksmith's shop. The boy sniffed. "That's Taza. He's the horse trainer. You pay me, not him." Clara paid the 4 bits, her hand trembling slightly. The Calico Ford Emporium was a long, narrow room that smelled of coffee beans, new denim, cured bacon, and the sharp tang of lye soap. It was a jumble of civilization, barrels of flour and nails, bolts of calico and flannel, shelves of patent medicines, and a glass case holding 3 dusty pistols. It was Saturday night, and the store was crowded. The moment Clara stepped inside, the conversation lulled. She felt the eyes on her, the women in their sun-faded calico, the miners with coal dust ground into their knuckles. Her tailored suit, even ruined, marked her as an outsider. "New school marm," they say. A woman whispered to another by the yard goods. "From back east. Thinks she'll teach the Apache children. Ha!" Clara kept her chin high and walked to the counter. The proprietor, Mr. Henderson, was a man whose apron was a ledger of the day's work, stained with flour, molasses, and tobacco. "Good evening," Clara said. "I'm looking for lodging. A boarding house?" Henderson didn't look up from the scale where he was weighing beans. "Mrs. Peltier's, 2 streets over, by the church. She's clean. Rent's due at noon on Friday. If she's full, you're sleeping in the livery." "Thank you." Clara paused, gathering her nerve. This was the real reason she was here. "I'm also looking for my sister. Her name is May Monroe. She would have arrived about 3 months ago. She has yellow hair, and she's a little shorter than I am." The sound of the bean scoop stopped. The whispers by the fabric bolt stopped. It was not a simple lack of noise. It was a heavy, deliberate thing. A door being barred. "Mr." Henderson slowly tied off the bean sack. "Monroe," he said, his voice flat. "Don't know the name." "She wrote she was working here." Clara pressed, her heart beginning to pound a cold, slow beat. "Perhaps in the mine office, or as a seamstress." "Can't help you," Henderson said, finally looking at her. His eyes were pale and noncommittal. "A woman like that," a man by the stove offered, spitting a stream of juice that sizzled on the hot metal. "Yellow-haired. New, she's either married, working, or gone, and works only at the mine or the gilded cage." He let out a short, cruel laugh. Clara felt the heat rise in her face. The coldness was practiced, unified. They were lying. "I see. I'll take a bar of lye soap, please." As Henderson wrapped the soap, Clara glanced toward the door. Taza was there, leaning against a stack of feed sacks. He must have followed her from the livery. He was watching the exchange, his stillness absolute. He had heard the name May Monroe. He had heard yellow-haired. His gaze rested on Henderson for a beat too long before sliding to the man by the stove. Taza knew that name, or one like it. He had seen a girl, pale and terrified, with hair the color of prairie straw, being hurried into a wagon by Mrs. DeWitt's man 3 weeks back. The girl's scarf had slipped. He hadn't known her name. Now, perhaps, he did. He knew Mrs. DeWitt, who ran the boarding house up canyon, the one Silas Creed kept stocked for his investors. Clara paid her coin, her back straight as a rifle rod. She would not let them see her fear. She walked out of the store into the rising wind, the silence of the townsfolk following her like a shadow. Mrs. Peltier's boarding house was clean, but smelled of boiled cabbage and old regrets. Clara secured a small room under the eaves. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin. It was warm and tasted of alkali. She scrubbed the dust from her face and hands. She knew she could not hide. May would not be found by a woman cowering in her room. It was Saturday night. The town was celebrating something, a territorial anniversary. The handbills said. She changed into her only other dress, a dark blue wool, and pinned her hair up, her hands steady. The celebration was a patch of hard-packed clay behind the Gilded Cage saloon. Lanterns swung on ropes stretched between the buildings, throwing frantic, leaping shadows. A fiddle sawed at a reel, fast and manic, while a guitar player tried to keep up. The air was thick with the smell of heat, sweat, and cheap whiskey. Miners, cowboys, and a few ranchers with their stiff-looking wives circled the dirt, their boots kicking up dust. Clara stood at the edge, holding a cup of watery lemonade she didn't want. She scanned the faces, looking for May, looking for anyone who didn't seem to belong to this hard, raw place. She saw the law first, Sheriff Pike. He was a man who looked poured into his uniform, his face a mask of sun-baked clay. He wasn't watching the dancers. He was watching a solitary figure by the horse trough. Taza. The Apache stood with his arms crossed, a cup of water in his hand, watching the crowd with an unsettling patience. Pike stared at him with the proprietary look of a man watching a wolf caught in a leg-hold trap. A man stepped in front of Clara, blocking her view. A new face in calico Ford, and a welcome one. He was handsome, she supposed, in a sharp, pressed way. He was clean-shaven, wearing a dark suit coat despite the oppressive heat. He smelled of money, cigar smoke, bay rum, and tanned leather. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and just as warm. "Silas Creed," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Proprietor of the San Pedro. Clara Monroe." Her voice was steady. "Miss Monroe, the new school teacher." "I hear." His smile was polished. A noble calling, bringing civilization to the desert. His eyes moved over her. A slow, deliberate assessment that felt nothing like courtesy. It's a hard town for a woman alone, especially one asking difficult questions. Clara's stomach tightened. "I was asking about my sister. Mr. Creed." "I know. May, isn't it?" His voice was honey smooth, intimate. "Things get lost out here. Miss Monroe, people, too. A woman needs friends. She needs protection." He leaned closer. "A town like this, it can eat up pretty things. I can be a patron. I can ensure your schoolhouse has glass in its windows. I can ensure your questions get answered by the right people." "And what price would that be?" Clara asked, her voice cold. "Just your gratitude," he murmured. "A little of your time. This is a lonely place." He placed a hand on her elbow. His fingers were light, but they felt like a brand. "Perhaps you'll reconsider. Let us dance." It was not a request. His grip was firm, proprietary. She was cornered. By the crowd, by the heat, by his polite, venomous offer. She pulled back, but his grip tightened. "I think not, Mr. Creed. I insist." Her eyes darted past him, searching for escape. They landed on Taza. He was watching them. His face was still as stone. She didn't think. She acted. Clara pulled her arm sharply from Creed's grasp. The music stuttered as the fiddler missed a note. She walked straight past a startled Silas Creed, across the 10 feet of open dirt. The whispers stopped. Every eye in the yard was on her. She stopped directly in front of Taza. He was so tall she had to tip her head back. The lanterns lit the white seam of the scar on his jaw. She could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and dust on him. "Excuse me?" Clara said, her voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can you pretend to be my date?" The fiddle music died completely. The only sound was the wind rattling a loose shutter on the saloon. Taza looked past her, at Silas Creed, who was watching with a look of pale, frozen rage. He held Creed's gaze for a long, silent moment. Then his eyes dropped back to Clara. He saw the desperation there, and the raw, terrified defiance. He gave a single, slow nod. He stepped to her side. He did not touch her. He did not take her arm. But he stood close enough that she could feel the radiating heat of him, a silent, towering presence. The town felt the line being drawn. The hum of the crowd changed. It had been rowdy. Now it turned acidic, judgmental. Whispers broke out like small fires. "Did you see that? Bold as brass. With him!" Silas Creed stared at them both, his handsome face hardening into something ugly. Without a word, he turned on his heel and strode into the saloon. The fiddler, seeing his paying customers standing idle, quickly struck up a slow, sad waltz. But no one moved to dance. They were all watching the schoolmarm and the Apache. A drunk miner, Amos Fry, emboldened by whiskey and the crowd's shifting mood, stumbled toward them. "Well now, Pike," he yelled at the sheriff. "Looky here, the schoolmarm sniffing round the reservation." Sheriff Pike just watched, his hand resting on his pistol, his face impassive. "What's the matter? Taza?" Fry sneered, using a slur that made Clara flinch. "You finally buy yourself a white woman?" Taza didn't move a muscle. He didn't look at the miner. He looked at a spot on the far wall, as if weighing something. Fry, angered by the silence, shoved Taza's chest. It was, Clara thought, like a sparrow striking a boulder. Taza absorbed the blow without rocking. "I'm talking to you, you redskin." Taza moved. It wasn't fast, but it was final. He didn't raise a fist. He simply turned his head and settled his gaze on Amos Fry. He did not threaten. He simply saw. He saw the cheap whiskey, the sour sweat, the weak core of the man, and he dismissed him. It was a look that spoke of dry canyons, long nights, and a capacity for survival the drunk man couldn't begin to understand. Fry's words died in his throat. He swallowed, his bravado leaking out of him, leaving only the sour dregs. He looked at Pike for help, but the sheriff offered none. The miner wiped his mouth, mumbled something incoherent, and shuffled away, disappearing into the crowd. The spell was broken, but the air was poisoned. Taza looked down at Clara. The dance is over. He was right. As they walked toward the street, the crowd did not part. It recoiled. Families pulled their children back. Women turned their heads. The isolation was as real as a physical wall. The next morning was Sunday. When Clara went to the Emporium for coffee and flour, Mr. Henderson served her, but his eyes were cold. "Folks are talking, miss," he said, his voice low as he handed her the change. "This ain't Tucson. We're a decent town. We have standards. I don't understand." "Mr. Creed is a benefactor to this town," Henderson said, his face grim. "You made him look a fool, and you did it with him." He jerked his chin toward the street, where Taza was loading feed onto a wagon. "That's company that'll get your schoolhouse burned before you even build it. Decent folk won't have their children taught by a woman who keeps that company." "He protected me," Clara said, her voice tight. "That's not what they see," Henderson replied, turning away. The storm had not broken. All day, the air grew thicker, heavier, pressing down on the small town. The sky churned with dark, bruised clouds. By evening, the wind had teeth, sharp and cold. Heat lightning ripped the sky open in the south, silently illuminating the skeletons of the mountains. Taza walked Clara from the small church service, where no one had spoken to her, back to Mrs. Peltier's. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, keeping a respectful distance. The silence stretched, filled only by the rattling of a loose tin roof nearby. "I'm sorry," Clara said, turning on the steps. Her voice was low. "It was wrong of me to use you like that. I put you in a terrible position. Mr. Creed was—" "I know what he is," Taza said. He was looking at the street, not at her. "He is a man who uses everyone. You just used him back. The things they said, the way they look at you. I am used to how they look." She hadn't meant to tell him. It felt weak, like a confession of failure. But the isolation of the last 24 hours, the cold faces in the store, the predatory smile of Silas Creed, and the absolute wall of silence around May's name had broken something in her. "I'm not just here to teach," she whispered, her voice cracking on her sister's name. "I am hunting for my sister. May, she came here 2 months ago. Her letters, they stopped. She said she was sewing, but the money she sent home. It was too much for sewing." She looked at him, her eyes pleading in the strange, electric light. "The people in the store, they acted like I'd spoken a curse. They know, I know they know, but they won't speak of her." Taza turned his head. The faint lightning flashed again, catching the planes of his face, the white line of his scar. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the flat, guarded expression soften into something else. Recognition? "May Monroe." He said. It wasn't a question. "You know her? You've seen her?" Clara grabbed the porch rail to steady herself. "I know the name," he said, his voice spare. "There's a woman, Mrs. DeWitt. She runs a boarding house. Not this one for the mine. Up Canyon. Creed. He fills it." Clara's breath caught. "Is May there?" "I don't know," he said. "But I know where to ask. Not Henderson. Not Pike. There are others." He looked up at the churning sky. "Creed won't leave you be. Not after tonight. He thinks you insulted him. he will want to correct that. I don't care about him. I only care about May. You should care about him. Taza said, he is the one who matters. He looked back at her. This date, your pretense, it is dangerous. For both of us. But it might be useful. How? He will hate you for it, but he will not be sure of you. He does not know what I told you. He does not know what you know. It will buy you a day. Maybe 2. Clara nodded, the idea solidifying. Then we keep doing it, the pretense, for my safety. So I can search. For your safety. He agreed. There was another flicker of lightning, closer this time. In that brief, white light, she saw him clearly. He was not just a giant. He was a man, tired and scarred, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The dance they never had. She remembered the moment she had stood before him, the space between them charged with the crowd's hate and something else, something that had felt like a lifeline. He was so tall. She had to tip her head back to meet his eyes. The smell of him was not of sweat, but of dust, horses, and something clean, like cedar. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Be careful. Schoolmarm. He turned and walked away, his steps silent on the dusty street. He disappeared into the darkness just as the first heavy drop of rain struck the porch rail with a sound like a single, final coin. The rain that night was a false promise, just enough to turn the dust to a greasy, slick mud before the clouds broke and fled. The air, still heavy, smelled of wet creosote and ozone, hours before dawn, in a darkness so thick it felt like felt. Taza led Clara back to the livery. The night hand, Jesse Cole, was asleep on a pile of feed sacks, a thin young man with a cough that rattled his whole frame. Taza nudged him with a boot. Jesse woke with a start, his eyes wide with fear until he recognized Taza in the lantern's low glow. Mr. Taza, I ain't done nothing. No one said you did. Taza's voice was low. The schoolmarm has a question. Clara stepped forward. I'm looking for my sister, May Monroe. She came to Calico Ford about 3 months back. Jesse's eyes darted from Clara to Taza and back again. He licked his lips, his gaze fixed on the straw at his feet. I just sweep up. I don't know many folk. You work the nights, Jesse, Taza said, his voice flat, not threatening, but stating a fact. You see the wagons that leave late? You saw a girl with yellow hair. About 3 weeks ago, she was in a buckboard with one of DeWitt's men. Jesse's face went pale. Mr. Taza, I can't. He looked at Clara. Ma'am, you don't want to be asking this. Mrs. DeWitt, she works for Mr. Creed. Where did they go? Clara pressed, her voice quiet but fierce. Which road? I don't know for certain. Taza set a silver dollar on the feed sack. The coin gleamed in the lamplight. It was more than a week's wages. Jesse stared at it. He asked her if she'd ever been to Bisbee. Jesse whispered, his hand snatching the coin. Said the air was better for her cough. She was crying. Ma'am, quiet like. They took the South Road, the Bisbee Road. That's all I seen. I swear. He scrambled to his feet. I gotta check the back stalls. I gotta go. He vanished into the hay-scented dark. Bisbee, Clara said, the name tasting like ash. Why Bisbee? It's bigger than Calico Ford, Taza said, extinguishing the lantern, plunging them back into darkness. More men, more money, more privacy. Clara spent the morning trying to be the person she was supposed to be. She needed a reason to stay, a reason to listen. She used 2 of her precious sheets of foolscap to write out 2 notices, her handwriting clear and precise. Clara Monroe, formerly of the Boston Ladies' Academy, offers lessons in reading, ciphering, and penmanship. All ages, inquire at Mrs. Peltier's. She left one at the church, tacked to the door where the preacher would find it. She left the other at the half-built schoolhouse, a sad-looking skeleton of pine beams near the riverbank. As she hammered the nail, a woman walked by, her arms full of laundry. The woman looked at the sign, then at Clara, then spat into the dust and crossed the street. Clara finished her work, her knuckles white. By dawn the next day, they were riding south. Taza had procured a sturdy bay gelding for her from the livery. He rode his own powerful roan, a carbine resting in a scabbard beneath his knee. The desert they entered was not empty. It was full of a hostile, patient life. Spires of rock, red and raw, clawed at a sky that was already a blinding sheet of white. They rode through forests of cholla, their spines glowing like silver halos in the morning light. Vultures tilted in high, lazy circles, waiting on the wind. The land was broken, cut by dry washes, arroyos that looked like scars, hundreds of feet wide and 20 feet deep. They were the veins of the desert, and they were dry as bone. But in the south, the sky was boiling. Thunderheads, the color of a fresh bruise, climbed thousands of feet, their anvils spreading across the heavens. "We should cross here," Taza said, stopping his horse at the edge of a vast, sandy wash. "It looks easier to follow the bed," Clara said, wiping sweat from her brow. "It is," he said. "That's the problem." He urged his horse down the steep bank. Clara followed, Bess slipping on the loose gravel. They rode across the wide, sandy bottom, a wasteland of bleached stones and dead trees. As they climbed the far bank, the world changed. It did not begin with rain. It began with a sound, a low, distant moan, like a great beast waking. The air, which had been still and hot, suddenly turned cold. The wind hit them, a solid wall that stole their breath and made the horses dance. "Taza!" Clara shouted over the rising shriek. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He was looking back across the wash. "Ho!" he yelled, kicking his roan. "Ride!" Clara looked back. The sound was a roar now, and the sky had vanished. A solid wall of brown water, 10 feet high and choked with trees and debris, was pouring into the arroyo they had just crossed. It was not water, it was a liquid avalanche, a brown, roaring serpent of mud and stone. The first drops of rain hit them, not as water, but as ice, a cold, hard needling that stung her face and hands. The sky opened. It was not rain, it was a deluge, a solid sheet of gray that erased the world. "This way!" Taza bellowed, grabbing her reins. He dragged her horse toward a small rise, a rocky island covered in a thicket of gnarled mesquite. They scrambled onto it just as the floodwaters hit the bank below them, tearing at the earth. The horses screamed, their eyes white. Taza leaped from his roan, pulled Clara from her saddle, and dragged them both into the heart of the thicket. He shoved her down behind a wall of ancient, thorny wood and pushed her head low. He covered her body with his own, a solid, unmoving shield against the storm. The world dissolved into a chaos of noise, the roar of the flood, the crack of thunder directly overhead, and the deafening drumming hiss of the rain. It was a cold that went straight to the bone, a wet, piercing chill that felt like 1,000 needles. Clara trembled, her body locked in a rictus of cold and fear. Taza was a dead weight on top of her, his own body rigid. She could feel the shiver that ran through him as the icy water soaked them both to the skin. He was not a shield, he was just a man, getting just as cold, just as wet. But he did not move. He stayed, a solid, breathing wall between her and the storm, until the sky ripped apart and the rain finally, mercifully, lessened to a steady, miserable downpour. He pushed himself off her hours later, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time had ceased. The horses, he grunted. They were still there, huddled on the other side of the thicket, trembling, their manes plastered to their necks. The arroyo was a raging, muddy river. "We can't stay here," Taza said. His lips were blue. Clara's were numb. "We'll freeze when the wind picks up again." He scanned the opposite bank. "There, a hollow in the rock. We can cross upstream." He found a place where the water was shallower, still fast, but passable. The crossing was a nightmare of stumbling horses and sucking mud. They reached the other side and half led, half dragged the mounts to a shallow cave Taza had spotted. A dark mouth in the cliff face that smelled of wet stone and pack rats. It was not much, but it was shelter. They tied the horses at the mouth of the cave, where they were partly protected from the wind. Inside, it was dark and damp. "We need a fire," Clara said. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. "No dry wood," Taza said. He was already pulling the carbine from its scabbard, wiping it down with a cloth from his saddlebag. "We have to get out of these clothes. They'll kill us." He turned his back, a silent, clear dismissal. Clara's hands were numb, frozen into claws. She fumbled with the buttons of her wool dress, her fingers useless. She began to cry. Silent, frustrated tears of cold. Taza finished with his rifle. He turned and saw her struggle. He said nothing. He knelt in front of her, and his large, scarred hands went to the buttons at her throat. His touch was impersonal, efficient. He unfastened the dress, and she shrugged it off, leaving her in her chemise and petticoats. They were just as soaked. "All of it," he said, his voice rough. Clara hesitated. "I can't." "You will die of cold if you don't. I will die of cold. Give them." She turned her back to him, her shoulders shaking, and stripped off the wet layers, leaving only her drawers and camisole, which were damp but not soaked through. She handed the sodden pile to him. He took it, along with his own soaked shirt and vest, and wrung them out with a powerful twist, water cascading to the cave floor. He laid them flat on a high rock. He unstrapped his bedroll. "Get in this." He shook out 2 thick wool blankets. He wrapped one around her shoulders, his hands brushing her bare arms. His skin was cold, but his touch felt like a low-voltage shock. He wrapped the other around his own waist and sat on his heels, pulling damp twigs and a piece of dry punk from an oilskin pouch. He worked with a knife and a flint, his hands steady, and after a long, tense few minutes, a tiny, struggling flame caught. He fed it twigs, shaving by shaving, until a small, smoky fire crackled between them. It gave off more smoke than heat, but it was life. Clara huddled in the blanket, her shaking slowly subsiding. "I thought we were going to die in that wash." Taza looked at the fire. "Not today." He managed a grim smile, the scar on his jaw tightening. "This is a fine desert bath, better than some." The rough humor broke the tension. Clara let out a shaky laugh, which turned into a cough. She pulled the blanket tighter. The firelight flickered, casting their shadows large and strange on the cave wall. "May," Clara said, her voice suddenly hollow. "She was always afraid of storms. When we were girls, I'd have to hold her until they passed." She stared into the small, brave fire. Her last letter. It said she had a new job, better wages. She wrote. She said she was finally saving money, that she'd be able to help me. I was so proud. I thought she was working for Mr. Creed in his house, as a cook or a maid. She looked at Taza, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was a teacher back in Boston. My stepfather, he was a hard man. When my mother died, he made it clear I was a burden." May was younger. She saw how he looked at me. She left. She came west to send money back, to give me a life, and I let her. The silence in the cave was heavy, broken only by the drip of water and the hiss of the fire. Taza added another twig. His voice, when he spoke, was spare, stripped of all comfort. "My brother, Chenzin, he was afraid of the quiet, not storms, the quiet. After they moved us to the reservation, the quiet was everywhere. It meant the soldiers were watching." Clara looked at him, startled. He had never spoken of himself. "He died of a fever," Taza said, his gaze fixed on the flames. "The white man's fever. The agent wouldn't give us quinine. He said it was for his own family." He paused, his hands tightening. "My friend, Nako, he was loud. He laughed. A rancher's wife lost a bracelet. Nako was in town. They hanged him." "He didn't do it," Clara whispered. "No, he hadn't seen her, but he was Apache, and he was loud." Taza looked up, and his eyes met hers across the fire. The pain in them was so old and deep, it was part of the landscape of his face. Men said it felt like justice, because it felt like power. "They took my brother. They took my friend, Creed. He is the same kind of man. He takes..." That is all he knows. He had given her his own story, a piece of his own wound, to balance hers. She saw him then, not as a giant, not as an Apache, but as a man who carried a weight as heavy as her own. Without thinking, she leaned forward across the small fire. He leaned forward, too. It was not a decision. It was an instinct, like seeking warmth. His breath, warm from the firelight, brushed her lips. She smelled smoke and wet wool and the clean, sharp scent of him. She kissed him, or perhaps he kissed her. It was hesitant, chaste, just the press of lips. But it was electric. It was a spark, a tiny, impossible point of heat in the cold, wet dark. It was the touch of two people who had been utterly alone, and suddenly were not. They both pulled back at the same time, as if struck. Their eyes met, wide and startled. The air between them was sharp, dangerous. That one small touch had changed everything. It was no longer a pretense. It was necessary. And in a town like Calico Ford, it was a death sentence. Clara turned away first, pulling the blanket tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. Taza turned back to the fire, his face a mask of stone, but his hands were unsteady as he added another stick to the flames. They rode into Bisbee the next afternoon, stiff, sore, and covered in dried mud. Bisbee was a real town, a sprawling, chaotic city clinging to the side of a mountain, choked with the smoke of smelters and the noise of 10,000 men. Taza led them to a small shop on a side street. A. Lang, photographer assayer. The man inside was small, worried, with ink stains on his fingers and spectacles on his nose. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes darting to Taza and then quickly away. "We are looking for this woman," Clara said, handing him the small tintype she carried of May. "Mr." Lang looked at it. "A pretty girl." I'm afraid I haven't seen her." His hands were shaking. "We were told you take photographs for Mr. Silas Creed," Taza said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the small shop. "Mr." Lang dropped the tintype. I do assay work for the mine. We are not the sheriff," Clara said gently, picking up the photo. "We are not here to make trouble for you. We are looking for my sister. We think Mr. Creed has her." "Mr." Lang looked at the tintype in her hand. He looked at Taza, who stood by the door, a silent, unmoving guardian. He licked his lips. "He makes me for his investors. Private parties. We need to see them." Clara said, "They are glass plates." He whispered, "He would ruin me. He would kill me. He will kill her, if he hasn't already." Clara said, "Mr." Lang hesitated, his small frame trembling. He looked at the tintype one more time. She has your eyes." He made a decision. He locked the shop door and pulled the blind. "In the back, but you cannot take them. You can only look." He led them to his dark room. It smelled of chemicals that burned the nose. He pulled out a wooden box and began sliding glass plates, 8 inches by 10, into the light. I'm sorry." The images were grotesque. They were from parties, held in opulent rooms. Silas Creed, smiling, with investors from Tucson and San Francisco, and women, young women, some no older than 16, dressed in flimsy costumes, arranged like goods, their eyes hollow. "He calls them his entertainments." "Mr." Lang said, his voice sick. Clara scanned plate after plate, her stomach turning. "There," she whispered, her finger touching the glass. In the background of one shot, half hidden by a potted palm, was a girl. Her face was blurred, out of focus, but the hair was the color of pale straw, the set of her shoulders, the way she held her head. It could be May. "Is that her?" Taza asked. "I don't know," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I don't know." They left the shop, the chemical smell clinging to them. Mrs. DeWitt's boarding house in Bisbee was a respectable-looking brick building. The woman herself was a wall of powdered perfume and false gentility. "Monroe? Oh, dear me, no," she said, tapping her fan against her chin. I have no girl by that name, and I would remember I run a house for respectable working girls. She denied everything. She had never seen May. She had never heard of her. As they left, a young service girl, Ruthie, no older than 15, was scrubbing the front steps. As Clara passed, the girl, accidentally, dropped her brush. When Clara bent to help, the girl grabbed her wrist. "Don't look," Ruthie whispered, her eyes on the ground. "She was here, the one with the yellow hair. She got sick. They took her away, to the rest home." "Where?" Clara breathed. "Up Canyon, from Calico Ford, the old Pinhook mine. They don't come back from there." The girl snatched her brush and scrubbed, her knuckles raw. "Get away from here. You'll end up there, too." The ride back to Calico Ford was silent, a grim march under a punishing sun. The ground was already dry, the flood a memory, but the air felt heavy with what they now knew. They were just outside of town, at the bridge crossing the now placid San Pedro, when a horseman blocked their path. Well, Sheriff Pike said. He spat a stream of tobacco into the river. "The lovebirds return." His eyes were flat, like dull pennies. He ignored Clara and fixed his gaze on Taza. "That's a fine carbine you carry, Taza." "It is legal," Taza said. "Legal for a man." Pike said, "Questionable for an Apache. You riding scout for the Army again? I don't see no blue uniform." "I train horses for the Army," Taza said. "They know I carry it." "I don't, though," Pike said. "And I'm the law in Calico Ford. I see you with that thing again, pointing it at anything other than a rabbit. I'm taking it, and I'm taking you." He smiled, a thin, cruel parting of his lips. "You understand me?" Taza stared at him, his face impassive. "I understand you." Pike nodded, satisfied. He tipped his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, seems you're drawn to trouble. First creed. Now this, a woman should be more careful of the company she keeps." He kicked his horse and trotted past them into town. That night, the pretense had to be renewed. The saloon was the only place to do it, the only place where the whole town would see. Clara's hands were shaking as she pinned up her hair. The memory of the cave, of his hands on her buttons, of that one brief kiss, burned in her mind. She met him on the boardwalk. He wore a clean shirt. He looked solid, dangerous, and out of place. "We have to," she said. "I know." She took his arm. His muscle was like iron beneath his sleeve. They walked into the gilded cage. The piano stopped. Every head turned. The air was thick with smoke and judgment. Taza walked them to the bar. "Sarsaparilla," he said to the bartender. The bartender looked at him, then at Clara. "We don't." "Sarsaparilla," Taza repeated. The bartender, his face sullen, poured the drink. They stood there, a silent island in the sea of noise. The fiddle started up again, a fast, scraping reel. "We have to," Clara whispered again. "It has to look real." Taza put the glass down. He turned to her. "Then we dance." He led her to the small, crowded floor. He put one hand on her waist, and it felt as hot as a brand through her dress. She put her hand on his shoulder. He took her other hand, his fingers lacing with hers. The music was too fast. They ignored it. They moved in a slow, close circle, a waltz for two in a world of their own. His head was bent low. Her forehead was almost touching his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, smell the clean lye soap on his skin. He moved with a grace that belied his size, a powerful, measured tread that was impossibly gentle, hands laced, foreheads nearly touching. She was breathing in his breath. The smoke, the noise, the staring eyes of the entire town faded to a dull, distant roar. There was only the solid wall of his chest, the grip of his hand, and the dizzying, terrifying feeling of being, for the first time in her life, completely and utterly safe. The music ended. They did not pull apart. Not immediately. They stood there for 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, the silence of the saloon roaring in their ears. Then they walked out. They didn't run. They walked, his hand on the small of her back. and stepped out of the lantern light and into the deep shadow of the alley. They stopped, leaning against the rough adobe wall. The night air was thick with dust and wanting. They were both breathing unsteadily. The pretense had become something else entirely. It was a fire they had lit to keep the wolves at bay, and now it was threatening to burn them both alive. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "I know," she whispered, not looking at him. "Don't say it." The fuse was lit in the gilded cage. It started, as it always did, with a body. A miner named Tom Welsh, who had a wife in Tucson and a bad habit of speaking his mind, was found at the bottom of a ravine 3 miles from the mine. His neck was broken, but the gash in his side had bled a great deal before the fall. He had been the loudest voice at the last payroll, complaining that Silas Creed's company store was docking half his wages for watered whiskey and high-priced beans. He had also, in his anger, picked a fight at the saloon, and one of Silas's foremen, a man named Brody, made sure everyone remembered it. Welsh was mouthy, Brody said, his voice carrying over the afternoon drinkers. He was drunk. He staggered out round midnight, said he was going to settle his accounts. He was mad at Creed, someone offered. He was. Brody agreed, nodding slowly, as if weighing the thought. But he was madder at that Apache. I heard him. Welsh said that giant redskin was spooking the town, and that he ought to be strung up for looking at the schoolmarm. A murmur went through the room. It was true. Tom Welsh had been one of the loudest voices sneering at Taza. "So," Brody continued, "Welsh leaves. Drunk. Taza leaves right after. Now Welsh is dead and his pockets are empty." He shook his head. A picture of grim, reluctant justice. "I hate to say it, but a man complains about his pay. He gets a knife in the gut. Sounds like robbery." And Taza was the last one to see him. The rumor spread from the saloon to the emporium, from the emporium to the livery. It was a dry, brittle weed, and it caught fire instantly. It was the story the town wanted to hear. It made sense. It was clean. The Apache, the outsider, the savage, had killed a white man for his pay. By sundown, it was no longer a rumor. It was a fact. Dawn broke cold and gray. Clara had not slept. The alley behind the gilded cage had felt like a confession, the air thick with a truth she was not ready to name. She sat in her small room at Mrs. Peltier's, fully dressed, watching the gray light seep into the street. She heard the commotion first. Shouts, the heavy, thudding sound of boots on the boardwalk. She ran down the stairs and into the street. It was all happening at the livery, just as the sky was turning a pale, sickly yellow. Sheriff Pike was there with 3 deputies. They had Taza. Pike had his pistol drawn and leveled at Taza's chest. Taza stood in the livery doorway, his hands at his sides. He was not resisting. He had been cleaning a stall, and his shirt was damp with horse sweat. He just stood, his face carved from stone, watching Pike with a stillness that was more defiant than any struggle. "Turn around, Taza," Pike said, his voice sharp with pleasure. "Hands behind your back." "Why?" Taza asked. "For the murder of Tom Welsh? I did not kill him." "Save it," Pike spat. "Turn around, or I'll shoot you right here. It'll save the county the price of a rope." Slowly, deliberately, Taza turned. A deputy, eager, rushed in to bind his wrists with a rawhide thong, pulling it cruelly tight. A small crowd had gathered on the boardwalk, miners on their way to the morning shift. Mr. Henderson opening his store, a few women shaking out rugs. They were silent, watching. Pike shoved Taza hard in the small of his back. Taza stumbled, but caught his balance. He walked. As Pike marched him down the center of the street toward the squat adobe jailhouse, the men on the boardwalk began to clap. It was not a roar. It was a slow, steady, rhythmic applause. They were watching a show, a fine piece of morning entertainment, the proper order of things, restored. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She ran, her skirts tangling in her legs. She burst into the jailhouse just as Pike was shoving Taza into a cell at the back. The iron door clanged shut with a sound of absolute finality. "What are you doing?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "You can't do this!" Pike turned, slow and satisfied. He hung his hat on a peg and settled into his chair, putting his boots up on the desk. "Morning, ma'am. Seems your date is a killer." "He is not," Clara said, gripping the wooden rail that separated the office from the cells. "Where is your proof? Where is the hearing?" "Proof?" Pike chuckled. "The whole town knows," Welsh was mouthy. "The whole town knows Taza was seen leaving the saloon after him. Welsh is dead. Taza's alive. That's proof enough for Calico Ford." "That is not proof. That is gossip. I demand a hearing with a judge." "Well now, that's a problem," Pike said, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Our circuit judge, old Judge McCabe, he's in Tucson, and he ain't due back for 2 weeks. He leaned forward, his smile gone. "Until then, I'm the law in Calico Ford, Miss Monroe. I'm the judge, and I'm the jury, and I say he hangs." "You are a coward and a liar," Clara shouted. "That's enough," Pike said, his voice dropping. "You're starting to sound hysterical. Maybe you should go back to your room and lie down. Associating with a killer, it ain't respectable. It's lucky for you folks ain't starting to wonder what you knew about it." The threat was clear, hanging in the dusty air. She was next. She turned and fled. But she did not go to her room. The town was alive now, buzzing. People were gathering, moving from the street corners to the one place big enough to hold a crowd, the bare patch of ground by the church. It was not a formal meeting. It was a mob, forming like a thunderhead. Mr. Henderson was there, and Mrs. Peltier, her arms crossed, her face a knot of judgment. Brody, the mine foreman, was speaking, his voice loud. "Can't wait 2 weeks. What's to stop the rest of his tribe from coming? What's to stop him from breaking out? We got a dead man, we got the killer. This is miner's law. We need a miner's trial." A low rumble of agreement went through the crowd. "A rope," someone yelled. "Get a rope." Silas Creed stood on the edge, by his fine black buggy, watching. He was not speaking. He was just observing, his face a mask of concerned, civic duty, letting the fire he had lit burn on its own. Clara pushed her way through. Men grabbed at her, tried to stop her. "This ain't for you, ma'am. Go on home." She ignored them. She broke free and climbed the 3 wooden steps of the church porch, turning to face the angry, shifting sea of faces. "Stop!" she cried. Her voice was thin, reedy, lost in the rumble. "Get her out of here! She's his whore!" a man shouted from the back. The ugly word struck Clara like a slap. The shame burned, but the rage burned hotter. She took a deep breath, and this time, her voice was not thin. It was a clear, vibrating bell of fury. "Stop this! You know what you're doing is wrong!" "He killed Tom Welsh," Brody shouted. "He's a savage." "He is not," Clara shouted back. "He is a better man than any of you. He did not kill anyone. He could not have. I know he could not have." "And how do you know that, schoolmarm?" Pike's voice, lazy and cruel, as he walked up to the edge of the crowd. "Did he tell you he was innocent?" Clara looked at the faces, all of them hard, all of them closed. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Peltier, the women who had turned their backs. She saw Silas Creed, watching her with a small, cold smile. She was ruined. She had nothing left to lose. Her voice trembled, but it was clear and it carried across the yard. "He was with me." The crowd went utterly, deathly silent. "He was with me," she repeated, her chin high. "He was with me all night. He walked me to my boarding house, and he did not leave until dawn. He could not have been on the Bisbee Road. He was with me." She looked at Pike, a hot, desperate challenge in her eyes. "We are courting." A collective gasp went through the crowd. "Mrs." Peltier's hand flew to her mouth. A woman in the front row audibly crossed herself, as if to ward off a demon. "Courting?" a rancher named Jebediah muttered, his voice loud in the silence. "Obscene! It's an obscenity." The town had pulled away from her before. Now, They cast her out. She was no longer just an outsider. She was a pariah, a liar, a traitor to her race. From the small, square, barred window of the jailhouse, Taza watched. He could not hear all the words, but he saw it. He saw her walk through the mob. He saw her climb the steps. He saw her small, straight back as she faced them all. He saw the moment she spoke, and the way the crowd recoiled, as if she had thrown acid. He saw Mrs. Peltier cross herself. He saw the hatred in their faces, no longer directed at him, but at her. A cold, terrible fear seized him, a fear he had never felt for himself. He had lived his whole life as a target. It was a familiar weight. But this was new. This was his fault. He had let her get close. He had let her use him as a shield, and now the shield had become a weapon turned against her. A pride, so fierce it ached, swelled in his chest. She was braver than any man he had ever known, braver than he was. But the pride was poisoned by the fear. He had wanted her safe. He had wanted her to have her school, her place. He never, ever wanted her reputation burned for his sake. He gripped the iron bars, his knuckles white, and wished, for the first time in his life, that he could tear them from the stone. Clara walked away from the churchyard. No one touched her. They shrank from her, as if she carried a plague. She was utterly alone, but she had a plan. She had bought him time. The mob was broken, confused, robbed of its simple, clean narrative. They were muttering, arguing amongst themselves. Pike, furious, had stalked back to his office. Clara went to the photographer's shop. Mr. Lang was throwing things into a crate. His wife, a pale, nervous woman named Sarah, was packing a valise, her hands shaken. "We're leaving," Mr. Lang said, not looking at her. "After what you did, this town is going to tear itself apart, and they'll start with anyone who looks different or anyone who helped you." "They've arrested him," Clara said, her voice flat, "for a murder he didn't commit." "I know. I heard. Mr. Pike says he'll hang. He won't wait for the judge." Mr. Lang stopped, a stack of glass plates in his hand. "He can't. He can, and he will, unless I can prove what Silas Creed is, unless I can show them who the real killer is." "Miss Monroe." "Mr. Lang pleaded. "I can't. I have my wife to think of." "I know, and I will help you." Clara's mind was working, fast and cold. "You said you have the negatives, not just the plates, the originals." He paled. "How did you—" "You're a careful man, Mr. Lang. You wouldn't have shown us copies if you didn't have the real ones hidden. Creed thinks they're destroyed, but they're not, are they?" He slowly put the plates down. "They're in a false bottom in my assay box. They show everything. Him, the investors, the ledgers, the dates, the names. Give them to me. He'll kill me. He'll find Sarah. Then we protect her first." Clara said, "The afternoon stage to Tucson. I'll buy her a ticket. I have some money." "You'll give her a letter to Judge McCabe. I'll write one, too. She'll be safe there. She can go to the marshal." He looked at his wife, her face a mask of terror. "If I do this," he whispered, "you have to promise. You have to get her safe away." "I promise." Clara said, "Then I'll help you." He said, "God help us all. I'll help." She bought the ticket, her last few dollars going into the station master's hand. But she had another problem. She had to get to the rest home up canyon. She had to find May. She couldn't do it on horseback. She'd be seen a mile off. As she stood on the boardwalk, her mind racing, a voice rumbled from a freight wagon parked across the street. "Missy." She looked. An old man with a face like a dried apple and a shock of white hair sat on the wagon bench. He was mending a piece of harness. "You're Seamus O'Rourke," she said, recognizing him from the Emporium. "Aye, and you're the woman who just told the whole town to go to hell." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Takes grit. My Molly had grit. Your daughter." His smile vanished. "She worked for Creed, cooked for his private parties. She got sick. Sent her to a rest home in Tucson. He said, wrote her for 6 months. The letters stopped. He tied off the harness with a vicious tug. I seen what you did at the church. You're either a fool or you're telling the truth. I'm betting on the truth. Clara's heart leaped. You know the canyon. I haul freight up canyon past the Pinhook mine every Tuesday. That's today. I'm leaving at noon. He looked at her, his blue eyes sharp. That rest home ain't a rest home. It's where he keeps the women who get sick or who get mouthy, the ones who've seen too much. You want to see it. You be at the South Bridge. I'll hide you in the back, under a canvas. Noon was a white-hot glare. The town was shut tight against the heat, a silent, simmering pot. Clara met Seamus at the bridge. He shoved her into the back of the wagon, under a heavy, dusty canvas that smelled of grain and axle grease. The ride was a rocking, jolting misery. The heat under the canvas was suffocating. After what felt like hours, the wagon stopped. We're here. Seamus's voice rumbled. I'm checking a loose axle. You got 5 minutes? Stay low. Act like you're fetching water from the creek. Clara slid out the back. They were in a narrow box canyon. Ahead was a long, low, clapboard house, its paint peeling. It looked desolate, abandoned. Except for 2 things. The windows on the back, facing the canyon wall, were barred, and 2 men with rifles sat on the front porch, smoking, their chairs tilted back. She grabbed a bucket from the wagon and walked, her head down, toward the creek. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure the guards could hear it. A woman was at the creek, on her knees, scrubbing clothes on a flat rock. She was thin, her hair lank, her dress a shapeless gray sack. Her knuckles were raw. Clara walked past her, as if to find a cleaner spot upstream. I'm looking for May, she whispered, her voice snatched by the wind. Yellow hair, from Calico Ford. The woman's hands stilled on the laundry. She did not look up. Clara scooped a bucket of water and walked back, her legs shaking. She passed the woman again. The woman's hand shot out and she dropped the bucket, which clattered loudly on the stones. Clumsy! One of the guards yelled from the porch. The woman bent to retrieve the bucket, her back to the guards, her face just inches from Clara's. Her eyes were dead, but her voice was a fierce, desperate whisper. May is sick, real sick, in the back room, the one with the bars. He hurt her. She's got the fever. Now go, before they see you. Clara grabbed her own bucket and walked, not ran, back to the wagon. Seamus was already on the bench. She scrambled under the canvas. The wagon lurched into motion. That night, the town was a dark, watchful beast. Clara slipped through the alleys, avoiding the patrols of concerned citizens Pike had organized. She reached the jail. It was a block of shadow against a sky littered with stars. He was there, at the window. A darker shape in the dark. You're still here, he said. His voice was a low rumble of anger. I thought you had more sense. I'm not leaving, she said, pressing her face close to the bars. They smelled of rust and cold iron. I found her. What? May. She's at the Pinhook mine, in a house. Taza. She's sick. The woman said she's very sick. I have to get her out. It's a trap, he said, his voice hard. Creed knows you're looking. He's waiting for you. I don't care. Seamus O'Rourke is helping me. Mr. Lang is sending his wife to Tucson with the negatives, with proof. We just have to hold on. Clara, he said, and his voice was rough with an emotion she had never heard. You should not have done it. What you said. In the churchyard. What did you want me to do? Let them hang you? Yes, he said, his voice fierce. Yes, they were going to hate me anyway. That is the air I breathe. But you had a place. You had work. You threw it all away. For me. It's not a place I want, she whispered. If it means I have to stand by and watch them murder an innocent man, it's not a world I want. She reached up, her fingers finding the bars. His hand was already there. His fingers found hers, sliding through the iron. It was not a handhold. It was just a touch. Warm skin on cold iron. Warm skin on warm skin. The calluses on his fingers were rough against her knuckles. The touch was a jolt, more real than the kiss in the cave, more intimate than the dance in the saloon. "If this goes bad," he said, his voice low, "you ride, you take Seamus, you get your sister, and you do not stop until you reach Tucson. Do not look back. For me. Promise me. Clara." "No," she said, her own voice fierce. She pressed her fingers harder against his. "I won't promise that. I will not leave you." The silence stretched. The coyotes yipped in the high hills, a lonely, wild sound that echoed in the empty street. "Then I will promise this," she said, her voice soft. "If we live, when we live, we won't pretend anymore." He did not answer for a long time. She felt the slight tremor in his fingers. He pressed his hand hard against hers. A silent, binding vow made through the bars. In the dark, the storm broke just after midnight. It was not a steady rain, but a series of violent, localized brawls between the sky and the mountains. Thunder cannonaded off the canyon walls. The wind howled, a high, thin sound like a grieving woman. Under the chaotic cover of the noise, Seamus O'Rourke's freight wagon, its wheels wrapped in burlap to dull the sound, groaned up the canyon road toward the Pinhook mine. Clara lay flat in the wagon bed, pressed between Seamus and a new, trembling ally, Ruthie. The young service girl from Bisbee had shown up at Mrs. Peltier's just after dark, her face pale, a small bundle in her hand. "She killed a girl," Ruthie had whispered, her body shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Mrs. DeWitt, a girl named Sadie. She fought back. DeWitt hit her too hard. They just buried her in the wash." Ruthie's eyes were wide with a terror that had finally overcome her fear of running. "I'll not be next, and I'll not let her kill Miss May." Now, Ruthie held a lit but covered lantern under the canvas, her knuckles white. Seamus pulled the mules to a halt in a stand of ironwood trees about 100 yards from the house. The rain lashed them, cold and sharp. "Right," Seamus hissed. "The plan. I'll take the wagon up. I'll shout that I've lost a wheel and I need help. That I'm carrying whiskey for Mr. Creed. That'll bring 'em running. You'll be in the light," Clara said, her heart pounding. "Aye. But they'll be looking at me in the wagon, not the shadows." He looked at Ruthie. "Girl, you're small. You get to the woodpile. Be ready to make noise if they don't both come out, but not till I say." He turned to Clara. You go to the window. The back one. You've got till the lightning flashes bright. Then you're gone. We meet at the Arroyo crossing." "Be careful, Seamus," Clara whispered. "I'm too old to be careful." He grunted and slapped the reins. The wagon lurched into the clearing. Clara and Ruthie slipped out the back, melting into the rocks and scrub. Rain plastered Clara's hair to her face in seconds. She moved low, circling the house, her boots slipping in the mud. The front porch light cast a weak yellow square. "Hello, the house!" Seamus roared over the wind. "Help! Damn you! I've lost a wheel on Creed's freight. I've got a case of Tennessee's Best for you if you help me." The door opened. The two guards, Ansel and Pike, stepped out, rifles in hand, squinting into the rain. "Whiskey, you say?" Ansel, the larger one, called out. "A whole damn crate," Seamus yelled. "But it's rolling into the creek if you don't help me lift her." "Pike, you stay here," Ansel said. "I'll check this." "The hell you will." Pike grumbled. "You'll drink it all. I'll come. Watch the wagon." As both men moved toward Seamus, their backs to the house, Ruthie, already at the woodpile, let out a small, sharp yelp and tripped, sending a clatter of pinon logs rolling. "What was that?" Pike spun around. "Just a rabbit, you fool," Ansel snapped. "Or that kitchen girl. Now come on." They both hurried toward Seamus, their attention fixed on the wagon. Clara reached the back of the house. The window was there, just as she'd seen, barred. A faint, sick, sweet smell of fever and laudanum seeped from it. She pressed her face to the rough wood. "May," she whispered, her voice sounding small against the thunder. "May, it's me. It's Clara." A rustling inside, a shadow moved. "Clara?" The voice was a dry croak, unrecognizable. "Yes, oh, May, I'm here. I'm getting you out." "No," May rasped. "It's a trap. He knows you're coming." "I don't care. We're getting you out." A pale hand appeared between the bars. It was skeletal, the knuckles like marbles. "Can't walk," May coughed. A terrible, dry, hacking sound. He was here. He hurt me. When I said no. "We'll carry you. May, listen. I need proof. Proof against Creed." "The book," May whispered. He writes it all. In a book. I took a page." Her hand fumbled. "My ribbon in my hair. Take it." Clara's fingers brushed her sister's. May's skin was burning, dry as paper. Clara fumbled for the silk ribbon, her cold, numb fingers struggling with the knot. "Clara!" Ruthie's voice, sharp with panic, from the darkness. "They're coming back." A gunshot exploded, deafening, splitting the night. It wasn't from the porch. It was from the wagon. "He's got a gun!" Seamus roared. "It's a setup!" Ansel yelled. Another shot, then a scream. Clara ripped the ribbon free. "Ruthie, the back door! Now!" Ruthie threw a rock through the kitchen window. Glass shattered. Clara ran to the back door just as Ruthie yanked it open from the inside. Having broken the latch, the house was a single, long room. It stank of sickness, spoiled food, and despair. "May!" She was on a cot in the corner, a bundle of rags. Clara grabbed her, pulling her upright. May screamed, a thin, bird-like sound, as she was hauled to her feet. She was lighter than a child. "He's shot! Seamus is shot!" Ruthie yelled, her face white. Gunfire erupted from the front of the house. Ansel and Pike were firing at Seamus, who was returning fire with a large pistol. "This way! To the wagon!" Clara shouted. She half-dragged, half-carried May, whose legs buckled. Ruthie grabbed May's other side. Together, the two women hauled the sick girl into the storm. "Get in!" Seamus roared from the driver's box. He was slumped, one arm hanging useless, blood staining his shirt dark. "Go! Go!" Clara and Ruthie shoved May into the wagon bed and scrambled in after her. Seamus cracked the whip. The mules surged, the wagon lurching violently. A bullet sang past Clara's ear, so close she felt its heat. Another struck the wagon box with a heavy, wet thud. "They're coming!" Ruthie shrieked. "Hoofbeats! They had horses!" Ansel and Pike were mounted, crashing through the brush behind them, firing wildly into the dark. "The arroyo!" Seamus yelled, his voice strained. "Hold on!" He steered the wagon off the road, crashing down the steep, rocky bank into the wash. It was no longer a dry bed. The storm had turned it into a shallow, fast-moving river, the water swirling knee-deep. "He's crazy!" Ruthie cried as the wagon slammed into the water, spray flying. "We'll tip! He's smart!" Clara gasped, shielding May with her body. "They're faster on the road, but we have the wagon. Hold on!" A bullet struck one of the mules. The animal screamed and stumbled, but Seamus lashed it, forcing it to its feet. Hoofbeats splashed into the water behind them. Ansel and Pike were in the arroyo. Gaining. "He's hurt bad. Clara," Ruthie said, her voice tight. She was looking at Seamus. "He's falling." Seamus was swaying on the bench, the reins slipping from his one good hand. "Get, he grunted. Ruthie scrambled forward, climbing over the bench. "I have it," she yelled, grabbing the leather straps. She was a small, terrified girl, but her hands were firm. She lashed the mules, her face a mask of determination. "Yeah, get!" The wagon lurched over a boulder, nearly pitching them into the water. Clara clung to May, who was unconscious, her head lolling. And then the thunder, which had been a constant cannonade, became a single, deafening roar. It was the sound Clara remembered from the flood, the sound of the world ending. A wall of black water, churning with rocks and whole trees, appeared around the bend upstream. A flash flood, birthed from a cloudburst high in the mountains. "Ruthie!" Clara screamed. "The bank! Get us out!" "I see it." Ruthie wrestled with the reins, turning the mules toward the steep embankment. Ansel and Pike saw the wall of water too. They abandoned the chase, spurring their horses frantically toward the high ground. The wagon hit the bank just as the wave struck. The force spun them sideways. The mules screamed as the water tore at their legs. Clara felt the wagon bed lift, tipping. "He's fallen," Ruthie cried. Seamus had been thrown from the bench. Clara saw him, a dark shape, tumbling in the brown, churning foam. He was gone. Ruthie lashed the mules with a desperate, animalistic cry. The animals found purchase, dug in, and with a groan of splintering wood, they clawed the wagon up the bank, dragging it onto solid, muddy ground just as the main body of the flood roared past. A 10-foot-deep river from hell. The pursuers were gone, vanished, their horses, their rifles, swallowed by the storm. Ruthie pulled the mules to a stop in a grove of cottonwoods, her body shaking so violently she could barely hold the reins. She was sobbing. Great, gasping sounds. Her hands, Clara saw in a flash of lightning, were dark, not with mud, with Seamus's blood, which had coated the reins. "He's gone," Ruthie wept. "He bought us our lives," Clara said, her voice hollow. She looked at her sister, who was breathing in shallow, rattling gasps. "And we are not safe yet." They found the line cabin an hour before dawn, a forgotten adobe hut built for telegraph repairmen, long since abandoned. The roof was half gone, but one corner was dry, while the storm abated to a cold, steady drizzle. Clara and Ruthie carried May inside. They laid her on a bed of old, dry burlap sacks. By the shaking, weak light of Ruthie's lantern, Clara finally saw her sister. She was a stranger. Her skin was waxy, pale, stretched tight over her bones. Her yellow hair was matted and thin. A dark, ugly bruise covered one side of her face, and her lips were cracked and black. She was burning with fever. "She's dying," Clara whispered, touching her sister's forehead. "No," Ruthie said. She was tearing strips from her own petticoat. "We didn't come this far for her to die." She looked at Clara, her eyes hard and old in her young face. "You hold her. I'll get water. We have to clean her." For the next 2 hours, they worked. They forced water between May's lips. They cleaned her face, and Clara wept, holding her sister's hand, whispering her name over and over. And later, as May fell into a fitful, fevered sleep, Ruthie looked at her own hands, still stained. "Seamus, he never even knew my name." She pulled a needle and a spool of black thread from her small bundle. I can't," she whispered. The blood. Clara looked. Ruthie's hands were shaking too badly. Clara took the needle. "Hold the lantern. I'll do it. Show me where." Ruthie turned, pulling her torn sleeve aside. A long, shallow gash from a splintered piece of the wagon bed crossed her arm. It was not deep, but it was bleeding. Clara, her stomach rolling, pushed the needle through the girl's skin. Ruthie hissed, but did not move. They worked in silence. 2 women, bound by water and blood, mending what could be mended, while the storm died outside. In Calico Ford, the storm had a different face. Sheriff Pike, enraged by Clara's public defiance, had decided to break Taza's spirit. At noon, he and his deputies had hauled Taza from his cell. They marched him, bound and silent, to the center of town, where a half-built gallows stood in the muddy yard by the courthouse. The gallows was new, a project of civic pride, but it was not yet finished. Pike shoved Taza against the main beam. He looped a heavy chain around Taza's chest and padlocked him to the structure, his arms pinned. For safekeeping, Pike announced to the small, damp crowd that had gathered, "So his woman can't slip him a key." He leaned in, his voice a low growl for Taza alone. "Let's see how you like the air out here. Let's see how brave you are when every man in town can see you chained like a dog. By morning, they'll be begging me to hang you, just to shut you up." Taza said nothing. He just stood, chained to the wood, and watched the town watch him. He watched the rain run in rivulets down the raw pine. He watched Mr. Henderson board up a window. He watched the few children who crept close, daring each other, before their mothers snatched them away. He stood, and he endured. Mister. Lang watched from his shop window, his heart a cold stone of fear. Pike's cruelty had made up his mind. He packed his assay box, the one with the false bottom. He took a single valise. He left a note for his wife in Tucson, telling her he loved her. He did not go to the stagecoach. He went to the livery. He saddled his own horse. He knew the territorial marshal was not in Tucson. He was in Tombstone, mediating a water rights dispute. Lang took the South Road, the same one Clara and Taza had taken, riding into the teeth of the dying storm. He carried a letter, and he carried copies of the incriminating negatives, wrapped in oilskin, hidden in his saddlebags. He was risking his neck, but he was a man who believed in pictures, and the pictures told the truth. The night in the line cabin was cold. May slept, her fever breath a shallow rasp. Ruthie was curled at her feet, exhausted. Clara sat by the door, a blanket around her shoulders, listening to the drip of water. She finally pulled the silk ribbon from her pocket. It was damp, slightly sticky. Tucked into a fold was a small, folded scrap of paper. It was not a letter. It was a page, torn from a ledger. The light from the dying lantern was just enough. It was a list, dates, names, just initials. J.B. T.R. Governor A. And next to them, prices, $20, $50, $100. At the bottom, in a neat, practiced hand, was an entry. May, fever, loss, deduct wages, and the initials, sharp and clear, S.V.C. Clara's hand clenched the paper, her nails cutting into her palm. She heard a sound outside, not a coyote, a horse. She stood, grabbing a heavy piece of firewood. "Who's there?" The door creaked open. Taza stood there. He was soaked, covered in mud, his face grim. Behind him stood Mr. Lang, and two cowboys Clara recognized from the saloon, their faces hard. We thought you were in jail," Ruthie stammered, scrambling to her feet. Mr. Lang and friends disagreed with the accommodations. Taza said. His voice was raw. "Pike's a bastard." One of the cowboys, a young man named Abe, said, "Leaving a man chained in the rain ain't right. And what Creed's doing with those women? My sister came west last year. Could have been her. The guard's fine." "Mister," Lang said, his voice shaking. We just tied him up, switched him into the cell. He'll have a headache in the morning." "Seamus," Clara began, her voice breaking. "We found the wagon in the wash," Taza said, his voice gentle. "The mules we saw him. Clara, downstream. We buried him." Clara nodded, a fresh wave of grief washing over her. "We have May. She's alive, but she's sick." "Mister," Lang and the cowboys moved inside, offering a flask of whiskey. Checking on May, Taza stayed at the door. He looked at Clara, at the strain around her eyes, the mud on her face, the blood on her skirt. "You're hurt," he said. "It's not mine." She said. They stood in the cabin's small threshold. The rain had softened to a fine, pattering mist on the shingles. The air was clean, washed, and cold. "You came," she whispered. "I promised," he said. He looked at her, and the pretense, the town, the danger, all of it fell away. There was only the hush of the cabin, the sound of May's breathing, and the man in front of her. He had endured chains for her. "What you said," he began, his voice low. "At the jail, about not pretending. I meant it," she said. "The dance," he said, his eyes holding hers. "It was not a pretense, not for me, nor for me," she whispered. He reached out, his hand slow, as if giving her time to pull away. He did not touch her shoulder. He cupped her face. His hand was rough, calloused, but his thumb was impossibly gentle as it brushed the mud from her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. He bent his head. It was not like the kiss in the cave, hesitant and startled. This was a kiss of desperation and relief, a long, unguarded claiming. His other hand came up, holding her face as if she were something precious, something he had almost lost. Her hands gripped his wet shirt, holding on. His lips were cold from the rain, but the kiss was heat and want and a desire that lit every nerve in her body. It was a promise, a vow, a prayer in the dark. They broke apart, breathless, resting their foreheads together. His breath was unsteady against her skin. "Clara," he breathed, his voice thick. "I know," she whispered. They were both shaking. They had found each other, but the world was still waiting to kill them. He, an escaped prisoner. Her, an outlaw. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. "Later," he promised, his voice rough. "When this is done, when you are safe." "Alive," she said. "We have to be alive." Alive, he agreed. They stood, hip to hip, for another moment, just breathing, gathering strength from the quiet. "Abe and Charlie are riding for the marshal," Taza said, his voice becoming practical again, though he did not release her. "But that's 3 days' ride. Creed will know I'm gone by sunup. He'll tear the town apart. And Pike will kill you on sight." Clara said. She pulled the ledger scrap from her pocket. "I have this, and Mr. Lang has the plates." "It's not enough," Taza said. "Not in a town Creed owns. We need witnesses. We need the whole town to see." A plan began to form, cold and clear, in Clara's mind. "Payroll," she said. Taza looked at her. "Payroll day, at the mine. That's tomorrow. Every miner will be there. Every man Creed owes money to. They'll all be watching. They'll be watching Pike hang me." Taza said. "No," she said, pulling away, her eyes bright with a cold, hard fire. "They'll be watching a safety lecture." She looked at Mr. Lang, who was tending to May. "Mr. Lang, you said you have a projector, a magic lantern, for lectures, geology." He stammered. "Tomorrow," Clara said. "You're going to give a lecture on mining safety. You're going to hang a sheet on the mine office wall. And you're not going to show them rocks. You're going to show them Silas Creed." Noon. The heat was a physical weight, a shimmering, white blanket that pressed down on the mine yard. The air stank of hot metal, sulfur, and the sour smell of unwashed men. 200 miners, faces grim with coal dust and heat, were crowded in the yard, lining up for their pay. They were a restless, murmuring sea of discontent. Tom Welsh's death had spooked them. Taza's arrest and his subsequent disappearance had them on edge. Sheriff Pike and 3 deputies stood on the porch of the mine office, rifles held easy, but ready. They were waiting for Taza to show his face. The gallows in the town square stood empty, the chain dangling, a monument to Pike's humiliation. Silas Creed emerged from his office, dressed in a spotless white linen suit. He smiled, holding up a hand for quiet. "Men, I know there's been some unrest, a terrible tragedy. Tom Welsh was a good worker, but the killer, the Apache Taza, has fled justice. He was set loose," a man in the crowd yelled. "By his whore," another shouted. Pike's hand tightened on his rifle. "Quiet down. You'll get your pay, mister. Creed has arranged a special presentation for your safety." On the side of the assay office, a large white sheet had been hung. Near it, Mr. Lang stood by a contraption of brass lenses and a bright lantern, his magic lantern projector. He was pale, sweating, his spectacles fogged. "Mr. Lang," Creed said, his voice booming with false hospitality, "has prepared a lecture on geological formations to ensure your safety in the tunnels. Proceed, Mr. Lang." Lang fumbled with his machine. The crowd groaned. They wanted money, not a lecture. Lang struck a match, lit the lantern, and an image wavered on the sheet. It was a cross-section of a mine shaft. This, Lang stammered, "shows the load-bearing strata." "Get on with it," a miner yelled. Lang's shaking hand slid another glass plate into the holder. The image that flashed onto the sheet was not a rock formation. It was a photograph, a parlor, opulently furnished, men in suits, their faces slick with sweat and drink. cigars in their hands, and women, young women, in thin Grecian robes, their faces painted, their eyes hollow. They were arranged like property, like hunting trophies. A collective gasp sucked the air from the yard. What in God's name? That's my cousin's girl, Sadie, a man whispered in horror. Mr. Lang. Silas Creed's voice was a whip crack. What is this? Lang, his body rigid with terror, slammed another plate in. This one was closer. Silas Creed himself, grinning, his arm around a girl who looked no older than 16, a glass of champagne in his hand. Beside him, a Tucson investor, a man many of the miners recognized. My God, a man whispered. He's selling them. Curses erupted. A low, animal growl rose from the crowd. The men were no longer a line, they were a mob. Brody! Creed roared at his foreman. Stop him! Stop that machine! Brody, who had been standing by the porch, drew his pistol. He didn't aim at Lang. He aimed at the lantern. A gunshot exploded, echoing flat and hard in the noon heat. The projector lantern shattered. The image vanished. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. The miners surged forward. A single, enraged body. Murderer! Slaver! Hold the line, Pike yelled, leveling his rifle at the crowd. Hold the line or I'll fire! In that instant, from the alley between the office and the smithy, Taza emerged. He was not alone. He was half carrying May, who was wrapped in a blanket. Clara was on his other side, her face set, and Ruthie followed, her eyes wide. They were a small, desperate island in the churning sea of the riot. Taza! Pike roared, his face purpling with rage. He saw his escaped prisoner. He saw the source of his shame. He broke from the porch, shoving miners aside, raising his rifle. You're a dead man! Apache! He leveled the rifle at Taza's chest. No! A miner shouted. It was Abe, the cowboy, who had circled back. He shoved Pike's rifle barrel toward the sky. The gun discharged, the bullet whining uselessly into the sun. Let him speak! A miner near the front yelled. A man with gray in his beard and 3 daughters at home. He's the one telling the truth! Another roared. A wall of broad, sweaty shoulders and calloused hands formed between Pike and Taza. Miners, men who had come for pay and now demanded justice. They blocked the sheriff, shoving him back. Let the man speak! Let the woman speak! Clara stepped forward, Taza guarding her back as he lowered May onto a crate. Clara raised her hand. In it was the small, folded scrap of ledger paper. He didn't just take pictures! Clara's voice rang out, clear and shaking. A bell over the din. He kept a book. He sold them. She began to read, her voice gaining strength with every word. June 4th, J. B. $50. June 9th, Governor A. $100. July 2nd, Sadie, fever, loss, deduct wages. He killed her, Ruthie shrieked, pointing at Creed, who was trapped on the porch by the mob. He killed Sadie. I saw it, and I saw him. Mr. Henderson, from the store. He came. And Mr. Fry. He came. They all came to the rest home. The men she named, who were scattered in the crowd, shrank back, their faces turning ashen. Silas Creed, his smile gone, his face a mask of pale, reptilian fury, was cornered. The miners were between him and his deputies. His escape route was cut off. He looked around, his eyes frantic. He saw May, weak, huddled on the crate. He moved. He was fast. He lunged across the porch, grabbed May by her matted hair, and yanked her up. Using her as a shield, he pressed the barrel of a small, silver derringer to her temple. "Back off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "All of you, back off or I'll kill her! Pike, get me my horse!" Clara screamed. "May!" Taza had been moving before Creed even finished his sentence. He was not a man. He was a storm. He crossed the 10 feet of the porch in a single, silent bound. He did not grab for the gun. He struck Creed's wrist with the edge of his hand, a blow that sounded like a dry branch snapping. The derringer flew from nerveless fingers. At the same moment, Taza's other hand grabbed the front of Creed's fine linen suit, and he pivoted, throwing Creed off the porch and away from May. Creed landed hard in the dust, but he was up in an instant, scrambling, terror giving him speed. He ran not for the street, but for the one place he knew, the mine. He disappeared into the black, square mouth of the main adit. Taza was right behind him. He glanced once at Clara, a look of grim, deadly promise, and vanished into the rattling darkness of the tunnel. "Stay here! Guard her!" Clara yelled at Ruthie. She looked at the groaning, splintering sounds coming from the mine. The recent rains, the strained timbers. "The mine's not safe," a man yelled. "The south tunnel was groaning all morning." The earth itself seemed to agree. A low, subterranean rumble shook the yard. Dust puffed from the mouth of the adit. "Taza!" Clara screamed. She ran toward the tunnel. "Clara, no!" Ruthie cried. The rumble became a roar, a violent shudder, and the heavy support timbers at the entrance of the adit snapped like twigs. The roof gave way. A cloud of dust, rock, and splinters exploded from the mine entrance. The tunnel collapsed. Mr. Lang, who had been frozen by his ruined projector, moved. He saw May, still on the crate, about to be buried by the falling porch roof. He lunged, grabbing her around the waist, dragging her clear just as the timbers crashed down. Ruthie, seeing Clara about to be sucked into the cascade of rock, grabbed a fistful of her corset stays and hauled her backward, pulling her from her feet. They fell in a heap, gagging, as the world went dark with dust. When the air cleared, the entrance to the mine was gone. It was a solid wall of shattered rock and splintered pine. Taza and Silas were gone, vanished. Clara got to her knees, her hands raw. "Taza!" she whispered. "Taza!" She began to claw at the rocks, her fingers bleeding. "He's gone, miss," a miner said, his voice gentle, pulling her back. "Nobody could live through that. The whole tunnel, it's gone." Silence fell on the yard. A terrible, stunned silence. Pike and his deputies stood frozen, their authority gone. The miners looked at the wall of rock, then at Silas Creed's ruined office, then at the pale, sick women, May and Ruthie, who were the evidence of their town's rot. And then, from deep within the rubble, a sound, a scrape, a muffled curse. Clara stopped breathing. A rock moved, then another. A hand, caked in dust and blood, emerged. They were in a pocket, a small, black space, no bigger than a coffin, formed by two massive, crossed timbers. The air was thick with dust that burned the lungs. Taza lay on top of Silas Creed, his forearm pressed across the man's throat, pinning him to the shifting earth. Creed was sobbing, animal sounds of terror. It's collapsing. Get off me. We'll be buried." Taza's hand held a knife, a long skinning knife that had been in his boot. The point was pressed just under Creed's jaw, the steel cold against his terrified, pulsing artery. Taza could feel the weight of the mountain above them. He could smell the damp, dead air. He heard nothing but Creed's whimpering, and he saw Nako's face, his friend, twisting on the end of a rope, his legs kicking. He heard the jeers of the crowd that day. He heard the agent's flat, cold voice. No quinine for him. He saw his brother Chenzin, his body burning, his eyes pleading. This man, this Poco, this filth, had taken May. He had killed Sadie. He had tried to kill Clara. He had tried to have Taza hanged. He was the agent. He was the rancher. He was the mob. One press, one small movement of his hand, and it would be over. It would be justice. It would be power. "Taza!" A voice, faint, distant, filtered through 1,000 tons of rock. "Taza, don't give them the ending they want." Clara, her voice. He heard her. He saw his friend's face again. Don't give them the ending they want. The ending they wanted was a savage, a killer, a dead Apache in the dirt, or a murderer, no better than they were. His hand, which had been tight with killing rage, relaxed. The mountain groaned again, shifting, dirt raining down on them. He did not kill him. He reversed the knife, raised the heavy pommel, and struck Silas Creed once on the temple. The man went limp. Taza tore strips from Creed's fine linen suit and, in the suffocating darkness, bound his hands and feet. He found his footing. He braced his shoulders against the crossed timbers and he pushed. The miners were already digging, working with a frantic, desperate energy. Their earlier rage now channeled into a single purpose. They tore at the rocks with bare, bloody hands. "There, I see him!" Taza staggered out, half dragging the unconscious Silas Creed by the collar. He was covered in a mask of gray dust and black blood. He shoved Creed at Pike's feet and looked at the crowd, his eyes black holes in his pale face. Then he found her. He saw Clara. He took one step toward her, and the world tilted. "Taza!" she cried, running to him. He collapsed. He didn't fall. His legs simply gave way. He went down to one knee, and then to the ground. "He's hurt," Clara said, kneeling beside him. "Get me water. Get me linen." A gash. She hadn't seen it. A piece of shrapnel from the collapse. A sharp shard of pine had buried itself in his side, just above his hip. His shirt was soaked, and the dust-covered ground where he had been standing was turning to a dark, thick mud. Clara ripped a long swath from her own petticoat. Her hands were red. Her skirt was red. She pressed the linen to the wound, her whole body shaking. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice fierce. "You do not leave me. Do you hear me? You do not leave." She looked at his face, so pale under the grime. His eyes closed. She whispered the prayers of her childhood, words she thought she had long forgotten. The sound of hoofbeats, hard and fast, cut through the stunned silence. A dozen men, armed and uniformed, rode into the yard. They were not Pike's men. They were hard-bitten, dusty, and wore the badge of the territorial marshal. At their head was a tall, grim-faced man who took in the scene with one sweeping glance. The collapsed mine, the bound prisoner, the armed miners, the sheriff who looked like a fool, and the woman holding the bleeding man. The marshal dismounted. Mr. Lang, who had returned with them, ran to his side. "That's him, Marshal. That's Silas Creed. I got your packet," the marshal said to Lang. "And I got your friends." He nodded to the two cowboys, Abe and Charlie. "Sheriff Pike," he said, his voice cold as iron. "You are under arrest for conspiracy and dereliction of duty." Pike's deputies, seeing the overwhelming force, dropped their rifles. "Mr. Creed," the marshal continued, nudging Silas with his boot. "You'll hang, but not here, in Tucson." Some of the miners cheered, a ragged, hoarse sound. Others just watched, their faces grim, their shame mixing with their relief. They looked away, unwilling to admit what they had known, or what they had allowed. "Get this man a doctor," the marshal ordered, pointing to Taza. "The doctor's on Creed's payroll," Clara said, not looking up from her work. "He'll kill him. Get him to the cabin, the one at the line camp." She looked at Abe. "Please, help me." Abe and Charlie lifted Taza gently, making a chair of their hands. They carried him away from the mine, away from the town. The storm that had shattered the canyon returned, a cold, weeping rain that settled over the mountains. They were in the small cabin lent by the cowboys, the one where Taza had found her. It was high, safe, and dry. May was in a bed, her fever finally broken, tended by a quiet, efficient Ruthie. Taza lay on a pallet by the fire. A doctor, brought at gunpoint by Abe from a neighboring town, had stitched the gash. The blood loss had been great. He was weak, pale, and drifting in a feverish sleep. Clara sat beside him. She had not slept in 2 days. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. The rain pattered on the shingles, a steady, hushing sound. Hours later, his eyes opened. They were clear. He looked at her. "You're red," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "It's your blood," she said, her voice thick. "Mostly." She touched his forehead. It was cool. "Did we did," she said. "He's arrested. Pike, too. The marshal has them. She's sleeping. She'll live." He let out a long, shuddering breath. The fire popped, casting a warm, flickering light over them. The world outside was wind and rain. Inside was the smell of wood smoke, coffee, and clean linen. "Clara," he said, "I'm here. I almost killed him." His voice was low, haunted. "In the dark, I wanted to." "I know," she said, "but you didn't. I heard you. Don't give them the ending they want." He turned his hand over, palm up. "They've taken everything I wanted to take back." "You did," she said, placing her hand in his fingers, weak, closed around hers. "You took back my sister. You took back those women. You took back me." He was cold. The cabin was cold. The fire was dying. "Get in the blankets," he whispered. "You're freezing." "I can't. You're hurt. You'll freeze," he insisted. "I'm cold. Warm me." She hesitated, then lay down on the pallet beside him, her back to his chest, pulling the heavy wool quilts over them both. She was careful not to touch his side. He shifted, his arm coming around her waist, his breath stirring her hair. He was so warm, his body, his breath, the solid, living presence of him, seeped into her. They lay in silence for a long time, listening to the rain. "I was afraid," he said, his voice a low rumble against her back. "In the jail, when you faced them, I was never afraid like that. Not for me, for you." "I was afraid in the mine," she whispered. "When the rocks fell, I thought you were gone. It was like the world ended." He pulled her closer, his hold careful, but firm. "I'm here." His hand moved from her waist, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. He turned her face toward him. In the dim red light of the dying coals, she saw his eyes, dark and deep, stripped of all pretense, all guards. "No more pretending," he whispered. "No more." She agreed. His mouth found hers. It was not the desperate kiss of the cabin or the public statement of the dance. It was a slow, tender, breath-stealing intimacy. It was the fragile, terrifying, and miraculous finding of two people who had been broken by the world and were now in this small, quiet room, making themselves whole. The world outside was wind and rain, rumor and judgment. But in here, under the quilts, there was only heat and trust and the sound of two hearts, finally settling into the same steady rhythm. The wheels of justice in the Arizona territory turned slowly, and they turned in Tucson, far from the high canyon gossip of Calico Ford. Weeks passed. Taza's wound healed, leaving a puckered, angry scar on his side that matched the constellation of marks he already carried. May's fever broke, but her recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl from a place of deep shadow. Clara, Taza, May, Ruthie, and Mr. Lang made the long journey south, not as prisoners, but as witnesses. The courtroom was suffocating. A box of adobe and plaster that smelled of unwashed bodies, stale cigars, and something sour that might have been fear. Silas Creed, flanked by two expensive-looking lawyers from San Francisco, looked as immaculate as ever. He was the picture of an aggrieved businessman, his reputation soiled by a hysterical schoolteacher, a runaway serving girl, and a savage. His lawyer was slick. He painted Clara as a desperate spinster, a woman of loose morals who had invented a fantasy to trap a wealthy man, consorting with an Apache to do it. He painted Ruthie as a thief. He painted Mr. Lang as a failed assayer, trying to I'm sorry. He paused, clearing his throat. Extort money. Miss Monroe, the lawyer purred. Is it not true that you publicly and shamefully declared you were courting the Apache? Taza, a man you had known for less than a week? Is this the behavior of a reliable witness or a woman? Afflicted. I said it to save his life, Clara said, her voice clear, her hands steady in her lap. Because Sheriff Pike was inciting a mob to lynch him, and it was the truth, the courtroom murmured. But the defense, for all its polish, crumbled against the evidence. Mr. Lang, his voice shaking but resolute, set up his magic lantern. In the silent, darkened courtroom, he projected the images, Not just the parties. He had plates of the ledger pages. He had photographs of Mrs. DeWitt accepting money from men Clara recognized from the Calico Ford Emporium. The ledgers themselves, recovered from the mine office, were undeniable. The final, fatal blow came from Mrs. DeWitt, seeing Creed's lawyers attempt to lay the blame entirely at her feet, painting her as the sole proprietor of a house of ill repute. Her false gentility cracked. She turned state's evidence. She spoke for 2 days. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as she recited dates, names, prices, and sums. She named investors. She named politicians. She described the rest home as a place for damaged goods. She detailed, in cold, business-like terms, how Silas Creed had orchestrated the entire operation, from luring girls with false advertisements for sewing jobs to the payoffs that kept men like Pike in his pocket. The jury took 20 minutes. Silas Creed was sentenced to 30 years of hard labor in the Yuma Territorial Prison. The judge, his face grim, called him a cancer on the territory. Harlan Pike, stripped of his badge in the courtroom, received 5 years for conspiracy, corruption, and aiding a criminal enterprise. Brody, the foreman, and the 2 guards from the Pinhook mine, Ansel and Pike, received lesser sentences. It was over. But as Clara, Taza, and the others walked out onto the dusty Tucson street, it did not feel like a victory. It felt like an amputation. They had cut the rot out, but the town would be scarred forever. Calico Ford did not greet them with cheers. The town was subdued, embarrassed. The mine had been shut down for 3 weeks, and only just reopened under the cautious management of a receiver sent from the east. The prejudice had not vanished. It had simply burrowed deeper, like a tick. Mrs. Peltier, seeing Clara on the boardwalk, sniffed and said, "My rooms are full. Miss Monroe, permanently. Mr. Henderson, in the Emporium, would sell to her." He counted her change, his eyes fixed on the countertop. He would not look at her. He would not look at Taza at all. One afternoon, as Taza walked from the livery, one of the miners who had been in the mob, a man whose name Clara never knew, spat in the dust just inches from Taza's boot. Taza stopped. He did not speak. He did not reach for a weapon. He simply stood and looked at the man. He held his gaze, his stillness absolute, until the man's bravado withered. The miner flushed, wiped his mouth, and stalked away, defeated by a silence he could not break. Not all was lost. The new mine manager, a practical man from Pennsylvania who cared only for ore tonnage, posted a notice on the assay office wall. It forbade any company men from patronizing any rest-home gambling hall or other house of moral turpitude. It was not a statement of virtue. It was a business decision. Silas Creed's appetites had cost the investors a great deal of money, and the children came. Clara had been forbidden from using the church. She was still, in the eyes of the pious, a fallen woman. So she went to the half-built schoolhouse by the river. On the first day, only 5 children appeared. The sons and daughters of Abe and Charlie, the cowboys who had freed Taza, then 10, then 20, the miners who had blocked Pike, the men who saw Taza spare Creed's life. The ones with daughters of their own, they sent their children. They sent them with tin buckets carrying their lunches, their faces scrubbed, their eyes bright. They could not live in town. They were not welcome. Taza found a piece of land 2 miles downriver, a hard, alkali flat that no one else wanted, but it had a stand of cottonwood trees and, most importantly, it had the river. He filed a claim. He began to build a horse yard. His name as a trainer was still good with the Army. They sent him a contract for 10 horses, then 20. He built his corrals from cottonwood poles. His work was long, from sunup to sundown, a patient battle of wills between himself and the animals. It was hard, solitary work, and it seemed to feed his soul. Clara held her classes under the cottonwoods. The children sat on logs Taza had dragged for them. She taught them sums on a large, cracked piece of slate, and taught them reading from the 2 books she owned. Slowly, other things appeared. Abe and Charlie arrived one Saturday with a wagon load of lumber, salvaged from an old barn. Mr. Lang, who had reopened his shop, donated glass for 2 windows. The miners, on their one day off, came and helped Taza raise the walls. In a month, there was a 1-room clapboard schoolhouse, small and unpainted, but solid. It smelled of fresh pine and possibility. Life began to find its new, scarred rhythm. May's recovery was slow. The body mended faster than the mind. For weeks, she sat in the sun, wrapped in a blanket, her yellow hair slowly regaining its luster. She was silent, her eyes holding a shadow that Clara could not reach. It was Ruthie who saved her. Ruthie, who had nowhere else to go, stayed. She was a creature of pure, practical energy. "You can't sit," she told May, her voice sharp, but not unkind. "Sitting is dying. We're gonna cook." The miners, still chafing under the high prices of the reopened company store, needed food. Ruthie and May started a kitchen in a canvas tent near the river crossing. Ruthie, using skills learned in a dozen harsh kitchens, made huge pots of beef and barley stew. May, her hands still shaking, was put in charge of the bread, kneading the dough. Day after day, her arms grew strong. Her silence broke. She began to talk, first to Ruthie, then to the miners. They ran the kitchen on fair prices. They fed the men who dug in the earth. It was a good, honest work. May, who had come west to find wages, had finally found her place. Not as a victim, but as a provider. And Seamus O'Rourke, who had taken a bullet in the shoulder and been stitched up by Ruthie in a line cabin, became their patron. His arm had healed stiff and crooked, as he called it. He could no longer manage the heavy freight wagons, but his mules were his own. He hauled freight for the women's kitchen, flour from Tucson, beans from the valley. He brought Clara her slates and books. He was the river's news service, their defender, and their bard. He sat by their stew pot in the evenings, his fiddle in his good hand, playing crooked, lively tunes. He told the story of the flood, of the rescue, of the fight in the mine yard. In his telling, Taza was 10 feet tall, and Clara was a queen. He was, he declared, the finest storyteller in the territory. And no one, seeing the bright, fierce spirit in his eyes, dared argue. The first winter came hard and fast. The wind that swept down the San Pedro was edged with ice. Frost crusted the water buckets, thick and white, and coated the inside of the small glass windows of their new adobe house. Taza had built it himself. 1 room, then 2. The bricks made from the river mud and straw. It was solid, low to the ground, and strong. They split piñon for the small cast-iron stove. Taza's axe rose and fell in the cold blue air. A steady rhythm. Clara, her hands raw, stacked the wood. It was a shared, simple language of survival. Clara, for all her Boston education, could not bake. Her biscuits were a source of grim humor. They were small, hard, and gray. Taza ate one, chewing with a serious, thoughtful expression. "Good," he said, his voice grave. Clara stared at him, at his stone-faced lie, and she burst out laughing, a laugh that turned into tears of pure, absurd relief. He watched her, and the scar on his jaw pulled as he gave her a rare, full smile. The next day, he taught her to make fry bread, his large, scarred hands patient in the flour, holding hers, showing her the motion. In the dim, blue hour before dawn, the coldest time, they lay under the quilts. They whispered. They did not speak of the trial, or the mine, or the fear. They spoke of small, tangible futures. "The gray stallion is ready for the army," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "He'll bring a good price. The Johnson boy can read a whole page now," she whispered back, her head on his shoulder. He read from the Bible yesterday. That is good. It was an intimacy built not of grand passions, but of small, share-over moments, of burned biscuits and stacked wood, and the mutual promise of survival. Spring came, and the desert, which had been so gray and brutal, exploded with a fierce, defiant beauty. The washes filled with a carpet of purple verbena and blue lupine. The high hills were dotted with the orange of desert poppies. They rode out together to check the fences of the horse yard. Taza's claim was large, and the fences needed constant mending. He rode his roan, she rode Bess, the mare who had brought her to Calico Ford. He taught her how to read the desert. He would stop, hold up his hand, his head tilted. "Feel that?" he asked. The wind was light, from the south. "It smells of damp stone. It will rain in 2 days." And it always did. He taught her to feel the weather in her bones, to see the tracks of the coyote, to know which plants held water. They rode side by side, their stirrups sometimes touching, and often, without a word, their hands would find each other. His rough, calloused fingers would lace with hers. It was not a gesture for anyone else. There was no one to see. It was an instinct, an anchoring, as natural as breathing. The prejudice of the town remained, a low, simmering fever. A traveling preacher, his face red with righteousness, set up on the boardwalk and delivered a sermon on abomination. He denounced them by name. "A woman who lies with a savage. A teacher who taints your children with her sin. They are an offense to God." The old, hard faces of Cal, Ford, Mrs. Peltier, Mr. Henderson nodded in agreement. Clara heard of it. She rode Bess into town, her back straight. She walked up to the preacher in the middle of his tirade. The small crowd fell silent. "Reverend," she said, her voice calm and clear, "my school is 2 miles downriver. I invite you to come and see the taint. You can see the children learning to read the very Bible you hold in your hand." The preacher, stunned by the direct, polite address, sputtered, I will not step into a house of sin. I will not." "Then you are a coward," Clara said, her voice still quiet. "You fear what you do not understand." She turned and walked away. As she reached her horse, 3 women, miners' wives, their hands red and chapped, hurried after her. "Ma'am, Mrs. Monroe," one of them began, glancing back at the silent preacher. We was wondering, we heard you teach. Could you teach us to read and to do the numbers from the store?" Clara looked at their faces, anxious and hopeful. She smiled. "Yes," she said. "I can, Tuesday nights, after your children are asleep." Hope was a stubborn, quiet thing. A few weeks later, Jebediah, the rancher who had muttered obscene in the churchyard, came galloping into the horse yard. His face was white with panic. His 10-year-old son, Amos, was cradled in his arms, his arm bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. He was thrown," Jebediah gasped, stumbling from his horse. He would not look Taza in the eye. "The town doctor, he's drunk. Please, my boy. I'll pay." Taza looked at the boy, who was gray-faced with pain. He looked at the father, a man who hated him. He said nothing. He simply gestured to the house. "Bring him in." Clara boiled linen and brought water. Taza washed his hands. He knelt by the boy, his voice a low, calm rumble. "Breathe, son. Breathe with me, like this. It will be fast." His hands, so large and powerful, were Impas Art's gentleness as he probed the break. He found the set. He looked at Clara. She held the boy's shoulders. "Now," Taza said. There was one, quick, violent movement. Amos screamed, a sound torn from his lungs, and then fainted. Taza, his face unchanged, began to expertly bind the arm with the splints he had carved. His work was neat, tight, and perfect. Jebediah watched, his face a mask of warring emotions. How much do I owe you?" "There is no price," Taza said, washing his hands again. "Just watch your riding. He is a good boy." The rancher left, carrying his son. He did not say thank you. But 2 mornings later, a large side of freshly butchered beef was hanging from the cottonwood tree by their door. That summer, on a hot evening, the air was still. The cottonwood leaves chattered in the slight breeze. The river was a low, slow murmur. Taza and Clara stood on the bank, watching the sun sink behind the mesas, turning the sky to blood and gold. They had built a house. They had built a school. They had built a life. He took her hand. It was not a question. It was a statement. "The house needs a wife," he said. His voice was plain. A fact. She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "The schoolteacher needs a husband." There was no preacher. There was no church, no book. There was just the river and the sky and the stubborn, hard-won truth between them. He spoke first, his vows spoken plainly. "I will listen when you speak. I will work to keep our home strong. I will keep you safe." She turned to face him, her hands in his. "I will listen when you are silent. I will work to build our future. I will keep you safe." They told their friends. It was not a wedding. It was a gathering, a celebration of survival. They met under the cottonwoods as the evening light turned the river to fire. Ruthie came, her arm linked with May's. They were laughing. Ruthie carried a huge pot of her famous stew. May carried a basket of fresh, warm bread. Seamus arrived, his stiff arm holding his fiddle case. He opened it, drew his bow, and a crooked, joyful reel sawed through the evening air. Mr. Lang and his wife, Sarah, came. Sarah, who had returned from Tucson, now helped Clara with the women's reading classes. Mr. Lang set up his camera, his tripod, his black hood. He took their photograph. Taza and Clara, standing by the river, the last light on their faces. They were not smiling. They were looking at each other, their hands laced, a look of profound, exhausted, and unconquerable peace in their eyes. Later, the friends were gone. The fiddle was silent. The fire had burned down to red coals in the hush of their small, dark house. The door was barred against the night. Clara stood at the small mirror, unbraiding her hair. Taza came up behind her. He had washed the dust of the corral from his hands and face. He put his hands on her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood for a long moment, looking at their two faces, joined in the warped glass. She turned in his arms. He kissed her. It was a slow, aching kiss that held no fear, no desperation. It tasted of wood smoke and summer and the river. Their future would not be easy. They both knew that. Prejudice was a long-lived weed, and the desert was a hard master, but the future was theirs. It was a life earned the hard way, guarded by a stubborn courage, and warmed by a love that had seen the worst of men and refused. Absolutely. To Bow, thank you for listening to this story from our collection. We'd love to hear where you are listening from, so please leave a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one, and share your thoughts with us in English.